It was already shaping up to be one of those mornings where everything went wrong. My alarm hadn't gone off, my coffee machine sputtered out halfway through the brew, and just as I grabbed my briefcase and rushed toward the door, I realized I was already 10 minutes late for a critical work meeting. Determined not to let the chaos ruin my day completely, I took a deep breath and stepped outside, only to be greeted by a sight that made my blood boil instantly. A white luxury SUV sat squarely across my driveway, completely blocking me in. Not just a partial obstruction. A full-on barricade. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to process the sheer audacity of it. The vehicle was spotless, polished to perfection, the kind of car that practically screamed entitlement. My frustration rose like a tidal wave. Who in their right mind thought it was acceptable to park like this? But deep down, I already knew the answer before I even glanced toward the house across the street. Karen. The self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood. The reigning dictator of the HOA board. The woman who once fined a family because their mailbox was half an inch too tall. The same woman who sent out warning letters for leaving garbage cans out a few minutes past collection time. And yet, here she was, treating my driveway like her personal parking space. I marched across the lawn, my irritation mounting with each step. Karen stood on her porch, watering her plants with an air of complete nonchalance. She wasn't in a rush. In fact, she looked like she was enjoying herself. "Morning, Karen," I said, forcing a polite tone despite my clenched jaw. "That wouldn't happen to be your SUV blocking my driveway, would it?" She glanced at the vehicle as if noticing it for the first time, then smiled. "Oh, that. Yeah, I had to run a few errands this morning. I figured it wouldn't be a big deal." I blinked, my patience already wearing thin. "It is a big deal. I need to get to work. Can you move it?" Karen tilted her head, eyes twinkling with something that looked suspiciously like amusement. "Relax, Ethan. It's just a car. You can wait a few minutes. The world's not going to end if you're a little late." I exhaled sharply, trying to keep my cool. "Karen, it's not a public street when you're blocking someone's driveway. You need to move it, now." Her smile faded, and her expression shifted into something colder. "You know, Ethan, I could report you to the HOA for your tone. We have community standards here, and frankly, you might want to review them." I stared at her, momentarily stunned. My tone? She was the one violating basic decency, and somehow, I was the one at fault. "You're blocking my car in, Karen. How do you expect me to leave?" She let out a dramatic sigh, waving a hand dismissively. All right. No need to get so worked up. I'll move it when I'm done watering." I clenched my fists, realizing exactly what this was. A power move. Karen was deliberately dragging this out because she could. She enjoyed the control, the smug satisfaction of making people jump through hoops just to do something as simple as leave their own homes. Fine. If she wanted to play that game, I'd play mine. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and dialed a tow truck. Karen chuckled, shaking her head. "Oh, Ethan. You really think they're going to tow my car? Everyone in this neighborhood knows me. I'm on the HOA board. Trust me, it's not going anywhere." I ignored her and gave the dispatcher my address. They assured me they'd send someone immediately. As I hung up, I noticed neighbors peeking out from their windows, drawn by the rising tension. Some even stepped onto their porches, watching the drama unfold. Karen, ever the performer, decided to make a spectacle of it. "You're really towing my car," she said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "How petty can you be? You could have just waited a few minutes." I met her gaze without flinching. "I asked you politely to move it, and you refused. This isn't petty, Karen. It's called having boundaries." She rolled her eyes and went back to watering her plants, pretending she wasn't fazed. But when the tow truck finally rumbled onto the street, her smugness flickered. And that's when the real show began. The neighborhood was still buzzing the next morning. The sight of Karen's pristine white SUV getting hauled away had turned into the most talked-about event of the week. I had barely stepped outside when I overheard a couple of neighbors murmuring about it, their hushed voices carrying the unmistakable edge of amusement. Some even gave me knowing nods, their silent way of saying, "About time someone stood up to her." But I knew better than to think this was over. Karen wasn't the type to take humiliation lightly. By the time I checked my mailbox, my suspicions were confirmed. 3 separate HOA violation notices. I flipped through them, my irritation deepening with each ridiculous claim. One was for failure to maintain a uniform lawn height, which was laughable, considering I had just mowed it 3 days ago. The second cited unauthorized trash placement, because my garbage bin had supposedly been left on the curb for too long. And the third, the most absurd of them all, claimed that my fence violated HOA aesthetic standards, even though it was the exact same design as half the houses on my street. I let out a slow breath, my grip tightening around the papers. This wasn't about community guidelines. This was retaliation. Karen was already moving her pieces across the board, using the HOA as her personal weapon. But that wasn't the worst of it. An hour later, a contractor I had never met knocked on my door, clipboard in hand, claiming to be conducting a random compliance check on behalf of the HOA. He told me he had been sent to assess my property for potential violations. When I pressed for details, he hesitated, then muttered something about my pool possibly not being up to code. I stared at him, my patience hanging by a thread. My pool had passed inspection the year before, I had every permit, every clearance, and there was no logical reason for this sudden interest, except for the fact that Karen was pulling strings. I didn't argue. Instead, I took his business card, smiled, and shut the door. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed Ryan. "She's coming after me," I said the moment he picked up. Ryan sighed, unsurprised. "Let me guess, sudden HOA violations? And a surprise property inspection," I added. "Classic. Give me a few hours. I'll dig into this." By late afternoon, Ryan called me back, and his voice carried the kind of weight that made my stomach drop. "Ethan, I found something. And you're going to want to hear this sitting down." I pulled up a chair at my kitchen table, my pulse ticking up. "Go on." "Karen has a history," Ryan said. "And not just the usual HOA power trip nonsense. This woman has been kicked off 2 previous HOA boards for harassment, fraudulent fines, and, get this, *** financial mismanagement, ***. I sat up straighter. "She's stolen money?" "Not outright, but close enough," Ryan confirmed. "She's been fining homeowners for ridiculous things, just like she's doing to you. The difference is, in the last neighborhood, someone caught on. A former treasurer noticed money was missing. Karen had been padding the HOA's violation funds with fees that didn't actually exist. She was funneling extra payments into maintenance projects that were either overinflated or never completed. And guess what happened when they tried to investigate?" "Let me guess," I muttered. "She left before they could pin her down." Bingo. She sold her house, moved, and, somehow, landed herself a position on another HOA board. Rinse and repeat. I ran a hand down my face. So, she's not just an entitled busybody. She's a con artist. Ryan exhaled. And she's pulling the same stunt here. But she's smarter about it now. She's not directly handling the finances, instead, she's controlling the violations, increasing fines, and making sure all funds flow through projects she influences. If we pull on the right thread, we might find something bigger. I was quiet for a long moment, staring out my kitchen window. The neighborhood looked peaceful, deceptively so. Kids rode their bikes down the cul-de-sac. A couple walked their golden retriever past my driveway. But underneath it all, Karen had built an empire of control, and I had just become her next target. How do we bring her down? I asked finally. Ryan's voice sharpened. We start where she's weakest, the community. If we can expose her pattern, prove what she's done before, and get enough people to turn against her, she won't have anywhere left to hide. But we need to do it publicly. If we take this straight to the HOA board, she'll find a way to spin it. I nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. Karen had used the HOA to make my life miserable. Now, I was going to use it to destroy her. The next HOA meeting, I said. Ryan chuckled. Exactly. You ready for war? I looked back at the stack of bogus violations sitting on my counter, at the petty fines, the fraudulent power plays, and the smug satisfaction I had seen on Karen's face when she refused to move her car. More than ready, I said. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock, but by 6:30, the community center was already filling up. Usually, these meetings were sparsely attended, just the same handful of homeowners who either cared too much about landscaping policies or had nothing better to do. But tonight was different. The air carried a charged energy, the kind that signaled something big was about to happen. Word had spread. The towing incident, the bogus fines, the retaliation tactics, Karen's abuse of power had finally crossed a line, and people were fed up. I stepped inside, scanning the room. Karen was already seated at the front, her posture rigid, her fingers tapping impatiently against the polished wooden table where the HOA board sat. She wore a confident smirk, but I could see the tension in her eyes. She knew I had something planned. She just didn't know how bad it was going to be. At exactly 7, Rick Thompson, the HOA president, cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. All right, folks, let's keep this moving. We've got a lot to cover tonight, so let's go ahead and open the floor for community concerns. I didn't hesitate. I stood, my voice steady but carrying through the room. I have something to bring to the board's attention. It concerns abuse of power, misuse of HOA authority, and financial irregularities, specifically, regarding Karen Monroe. Karen's smirk didn't waver, but I saw the subtle shift in her shoulders. A flicker of something close to nervousness. Here we go, she sighed dramatically, crossing her arms. Another tantrum because you didn't like following the rules. What is it this time, Ethan? You don't want to be held accountable for your violations? A few neighbors exchanged glances. For years, Karen had successfully framed herself as the enforcer of community standards, but tonight, they weren't so quick to take her side. I ignored her baiting. Actually, I wanted to share some facts with the neighborhood. I pulled out a stack of documents from my folder and handed them to Rick. This is a report on Karen's history with previous HOAs. As you'll see, she's been removed from 2 other boards for similar abuses. Fraudulent fines, intimidation tactics, and, most notably, financial mismanagement, ***. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People leaned in, eyes widening as they scanned the papers. Rick flipped through the documents, his brow furrowing. Is this real? Ryan, who had taken a seat near the back, spoke up. It's all verifiable. Public records, homeowner testimonies, and internal HOA reports, you can check the sources yourself. Karen let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. Oh, this is pathetic. Digging through my past because you're mad about a couple of fines? It's a smear campaign, plain and simple. I raised an eyebrow. A smear campaign? Karen, I'm not the one who fabricated violations against my neighbors for profit. I turned back to Rick. Because that's the second thing I wanted to bring to light tonight. Karen has been systematically targeting homeowners with false violations. The fines go into the HOA fund, but strangely enough, we've never seen a breakdown of where that money actually goes. More heads turned. Whispers grew louder. Rick glanced at Karen. Karen, do you have a response to this? Karen scoffed. Of course I do. These accusations are ridiculous. I enforce the rules fairly. If someone doesn't like being fined, that's not my problem. This is about community standards. I didn't break eye contact with her as I reached for my phone. That's interesting, I said, tapping the screen. Because I have something to play for everyone. The room fell silent as a familiar voice crackled to life over the speakers. Asterisk, I'll say he's aggressive. They always believe me over them. Asterisk. The audio was clear as day, Karen, recorded on the night she called the police on me, the smug confidence in her tone, the calculated malice behind her words. A collective gasp spread through the room. People weren't just shocked, they were horrified. Karen's face drained of color. That's taken out of context, she stammered. You don't understand. Actually, I cut in, I think we all understand perfectly. You weaponized the police against me. You've done the same with HOA violations, asterisk, and now we have proof. That was the moment the dam broke. A man near the front, asterisk, Walt Simmons, an elderly homeowner, stood up, asterisk, she called the cops on my grandson last year, he said, voice shaking with anger. Said he was lurking outside my house. He was visiting me, for God's sake. Another woman, Rachel Hayes, stepped forward. She fined me 3 times because she said my dog was too big for the neighborhood's pet policy. I have a Chihuahua, Karen. More voices joined in. One by one, neighbors came forward with their own horror stories, fabricated violations, targeted harassment, fines for absurd reasons. Karen's expression twisted into panic. This is ridiculous. You're all just ganging up on me because I actually enforce the rules. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart. Rick, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. Karen, I think you've said enough. The authority in his tone shut her down instantly. He turned to the rest of the board. Given the overwhelming concerns brought forward tonight, I motion to remove Karen Monroe from her position as HOA board member, effective immediately. Hands shot up across the board. Unanimous. Karen shot up from her chair, eyes blazing. No. You can't do this. I built this HOA, this is my neighborhood. Rick ignored her outburst. Furthermore, we will be conducting a full audit of HOA financial records. If any evidence of misconduct is found, it will be reported to the authorities. Karen froze. For the first time all night, she had nothing to say. And then, with a sharp exhale, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the entire room went silent. Then, from the back, someone started clapping. A moment later, it spread. By the time I walked out of the meeting, Karen's reign of terror was officially over. But something told me she wasn't done with me yet. The days following the HOA meeting felt like a breath of fresh air. Without Karen looming over every minor neighborhood detail, things actually felt lighter, more relaxed. Neighbors who had once been afraid to step out of line were suddenly more social, gathering in driveways, sharing coffee on porches, even helping each other with minor repairs instead of calling in violation reports. But I knew better than to believe Karen was gone for good. Her silence in the immediate aftermath wasn't a retreat, it was a calculation, and sure enough, 3 days later, the retaliation began. It started with the flyers. One morning, I stepped outside to find dozens of them taped to mailboxes, streetlights, even stapled to the HOA bulletin board. My name was printed in bold, capital letters at the top, followed by a string of false accusations so absurd it would have been comical if it weren't so infuriating. Asterisk, beware of the real menace in our neighborhood. Asterisk. According to Karen's badly written hit piece, I was a troublemaker who had manipulated the HOA board, staged the towing incident for sympathy, and conspired against her to seize power. The flyer painted me as a dangerous force intent on destroying the neighborhood's values and urged residents to stand together against me before it was too late. I stared at it for a long moment before laughing under my breath. This was her big move? Then my phone buzzed. Rachel Hayes had sent a picture of the same flyer with a simple message: "She's losing it. Want help taking these down?" I smiled, typing back, "Let's make it fun." By that afternoon, a small group of us had turned Karen's smear campaign into a community event. We met at the park, armed with coffee, tape removers, and trash bags, laughing as we peeled the flyers from every surface she had plastered them on. What was meant to isolate me ended up bringing people closer together. But Karen wasn't done yet. The next morning, I found a thick envelope in my mailbox, legal documents, stamped and official-looking. The sender? A law firm I had never heard of. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter, accusing me of defamation, harassment, and intentional emotional distress. According to the document, Karen was suing me for damages, demanding an apology and financial compensation. I let out a slow breath, flipping through the pages. It looked official, but something was off. I called Ryan. "You're going to love this," I said, reading off the letter's contents. There was silence on the other end before Ryan burst into laughter. "Ethan, this isn't from a real lawyer," he said, still chuckling. "This is amateur hour. Look at the formatting. The wording. There's no firm listed in the legal directory. I guarantee you she wrote this herself or had some shady paralegal throw it together." I stared at the letter again, my disbelief shifting into amusement. "So, she's faking lawsuits now?" "Looks that way," Ryan said. "And legally?" "It means nothing. She can't actually enforce anything in that letter. It's pure intimidation. She's hoping you'll fold and apologize." "Not happening," I muttered. "Good," Ryan said. "Because while she's busy faking lawsuits, I've been digging into her HOA financials, and, Ethan, we've got her." I sat up straighter. "How bad is it?" "It's bad," Ryan said, his tone shifting to something serious. "Remember how we suspected she was padding HOA fines? Well, I found where the money's been going. Turns out, she's been using HOA funds for personal expenses, renovations, vacations, even a luxury gym membership. And here's the kicker, there's over $50,000 missing, I let out a low whistle. "So, she's not just corrupt, she's a thief, "Exactly," Ryan said. "And I have the financial records to prove it. Bank transfers leading straight from HOA accounts to a maintenance fund that doesn't exist. She's been funneling money through fake invoices. Some of the payments even went directly to her personal account. It's fraud, plain and simple." A slow smile spread across my face. "So, if we go public with this?" "She's done," Ryan said. "Not just with the HOA, but legally. We're talking fines, possible criminal charges, and full-scale audits. If we present this at the next HOA meeting, there's no way out for her." The idea of Karen, smug and untouchable, finally being held accountable was almost too good to be true. "Let's do it," I said. "Let's take her down." The night of the next HOA meeting, the room was just as packed as before. This time, though, Karen didn't sit in her usual spot at the front. She stood near the back, arms crossed, scanning the room like a cornered animal. Rick called the meeting to order, but before he could move forward, I raised my hand. "I have a final issue to present," I said. "It concerns major financial misconduct within the HOA, specifically, Karen Monroe." Karen's face twisted. "Oh, for God's sake, Ethan." But I was already holding up a printed spreadsheet of transactions. "This is a breakdown of the last 2 years of HOA expenses," I said. "You'll notice thousands of dollars in payments listed as maintenance costs. The problem? The vendors don't exist. The projects were never completed. And some of these transfers? I turned to the board. Asterisk asterisk they went directly into Karen's personal account, asterisk asterisk. A ripple of shock spread through the room. Karen went completely still. Rick took the papers from my hand, scanning them. His expression darkened. Karen, he said slowly, can you explain this? Karen's lips parted, but no words came out. Rachel Hayes stood up. So all those fines you hit us with, the ones you claimed were necessary? You were just stealing from us. More voices chimed in, anger building like a storm. Karen suddenly grabbed her bag and bolted for the door. Stop her, someone shouted. But Karen was already gone. By morning, she had listed her house for sale. And just like that, Karen Monroe's reign of terror was over. Karen was gone. The morning after the HOA meeting, a for sale sign appeared in front of her house, its bold red letters standing as a quiet admission of defeat. No dramatic farewell, no final confrontation, just an abrupt disappearance, as if she had never been here at all. It was almost anticlimactic. After years of wielding absolute control over the neighborhood, Karen didn't even have the nerve to face the people she had tormented. But the damage she left behind wasn't so easily erased. The HOA board announced that an official audit was underway, and as Ryan had predicted, Karen's fraudulent transactions were worse than we initially thought. She had siphoned off tens of thousands in HOA funds, hiding them under vague maintenance expenses, and some of that money had even gone toward personal vacations and luxury purchases. But with the evidence stacked against her, there was no escaping the consequences. By the end of the week, a formal lawsuit was filed against her, and an investigation was opened into her financial misconduct. The neighborhood felt lighter, freer in the wake of her downfall. People who had once been afraid to cross her suddenly came together. The petty fines stopped, the surveillance-style HOA rules were repealed, and homeowners started taking real pride in the community, not because they were forced to, but because they finally felt a sense of ownership. One evening, as I sat on my porch, Rick Thompson, the HOA president, stopped by. He leaned against the railing, glancing toward Karen's empty house. We're holding elections next month, he said. You should run for president. I laughed, shaking my head. I think I've had enough of HOA politics for a lifetime. Rick grinned. Fair enough. But just know, if you ever change your mind, you've got my vote. As he walked away, I exhaled, taking in the quiet, the distant laughter of kids riding bikes, the low hum of conversation from neighbors who, for the first time in years, weren't afraid to talk freely. Karen had tried to control everything, but in the end, all she had done was bring people together, against her. Just as I was about to head inside, I noticed a plain white envelope sitting in my mailbox. No return address. No markings. Just my name. I opened it, my heart thudding as I read the single line inside. Karen was just the beginning. Look into the HOA's real estate dealings, you'll be surprised what you find. I looked back toward the street, my mind racing. Had we really cut off the head of the snake, or was the corruption deeper than we realized? Have you ever felt powerless against an HOA, or a Karen in your life? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.